yesterday after hundreds of migrants started rushing the fence. Officials saying that some even threw rocks at border agents. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, Fox Business anchor Dagan McDowell, former director of strategic communications for the Hillary Clinton campaign, Adrian Elrod, and joining us for the first time in the center seat, Louisiana Congressman and House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. And Congressman Scalise has this out, a powerful new book, Back in the Game. It chronicles his recovery after being shot and gravely wounded at a congressional baseball practice in June of last year. A beautiful book cover and message on the inside. Great to see you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving.
And you?
Wonderful.
Yeah, all that food. It's amazing we survived.
Now it's back to work. I already read some of the book. I was reading it before the show and had to fix my eye makeup. So it's incredibly moving and powerful. And we are lucky to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks.
All right. A lot to get to. We'll get to the news. San Diego's border crossing reopened last night after yesterday's incident. And now sources within the Department of Homeland Security are telling Fox News approximately 50 migrants were able to make it across the border illegally and then were apprehended. Exact numbers are expected to come later today. DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen described yesterday's shutdown, saying, quote, after being prevented from entering the port of entry, some of these migrants attempted to breach legacy fence infrastructure along the border and sought to harm CBP personnel by throwing projectiles at them. DHS will not tolerate this type of lawlessness and will not hesitate to shut down ports of entry, security, and public safety reasons entailed there, end quote. But Democrat Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii slammed that response, tweeting, quote, tear gas across the border against unarmed families is a new low, end quote. President Trump tweeted today, Mexico should move the flag-waving migrants, many of whom were stone-cold criminals, back to their countries. Do it by plane, do it by bus, do it any way you want, but they are not coming into the USA. We will close the border permanently if need be. Congress fund the wall, exclamation point. Congressman Scalise, we're at a new point, some calling it a new low, just a new level. What do you call it?
I call it securing the border. If you look at this, what's going on over there, when you see people attacking law enforcement officials of the United States of America. The Tijuana mayor said they can't even control what's coming in. So these aren't just, families seeking refuge. In many cases, they turn down asylum offers in Mexico. And so are you really seeking asylum in America when you stormed through other countries to try to come here?
Oh, I want to just ask a quick follow on that. So when you turn down asylum in another country, what does that country do in terms of the paperwork? Do they let us know? Does it follow them because some of them are coming from 3 countries away. So it may have happened more than once. What's kind of the chain of command in terms of what we are then told about individuals?
Well, I'm not sure how much of that is passed on to us. We know that they offered asylum, whether or not even they filled out paperwork, they just stormed through. I mean, they marched and stormed across Mexico's southern border to come ultimately to the United States border. But again, when you get to the point, there are places, ports of entry, and President Trump's talked about this. There are places where you can go to formally seek asylum. But if you're not trying to do that, if you're literally trying to storm a border and attacking law enforcement personnel along the way, these aren't families in the traditional sense of, a mother and a father and a son trying to come and escape tyrannical dictatorships. These are people that literally just said, we're coming to your country no matter what, and we're going to attack your law enforcement personnel along the way. Is that really what you want to see along America's border? I think it's good that President Trump is securing the border.
Some of them did fit the description that you just said. I mean, I think Americans woke up today to 2 different visuals. One of them, I know I saw locally on the front page of the New York Post, showed a mother with 2 small kids, who were in diapers and flip-flops, and, that really breaks your heart. You see the other images, some of which, we've shown here, which show some of the violence that's going on. Do you think Americans are smart enough to realize that both things can be true at once?
Absolutely. And when you see this, President Trump has said, look, there's a way to seek asylum in America, but attacking law enforcement personnel and trying to storm across, regardless in a different fashion, is not the way to come here. So people know there's a legal way and there's an illegal way to come into the United States of America. We ought to all be about securing our border. I'm glad President Trump is following through on his promise, what he said when he ran. And by the way, this was a big issue during the campaign, and he was elected president in part based on his promise to secure the border. border. I think most Americans want a secure border and a legal process to come to the United States, not attacking law enforcement personnel as your means of trying to get here.
So I followed up with the Congressman Adrian because I wanted to get that other options part of the conversation in, because some of the president's critics have said, well, these people don't have any other options. And the argument also has been, well, they're coming several countries away. So are they seeing options along the way? So the congressman has been able to fill in part of that gap.
Well, sure, and you're always going to have bad actors who are trying to come into our country illegally, who are not seeking asylum, who are doing it for different reasons. But I think here the optics look terrible for President Trump, in part because of the New York Post cover that you just cited, Melissa, that literally has a mother and her 2 children wearing diapers with tear gas being thrown at them. This is not what America feels like. So I do hope Democrats and Republicans will come together. We obviously have a huge problem at the border. We need stronger border security laws. I think everybody can agree on that. Building a wall is not necessarily the solution.
But
so
Bill
I think
Clinton
everybody should
thought it
sit down and have a real thoughtful conversation.
He thought it might help when he was facing this, right? I mean, that's when the border wall conversation really began in earnest with some dollars behind it.
But I think building a wall...
Personally, I look at a photo, that horrible photo of the mother and her 2 children, and I see child abuse. So again, if you're an American who believes in personal responsibility, that's a choice that the parents make, quite frankly. And number 2, President Trump has been criticized about his talk about Mexico. We have a very strong relationship with Mexico. I think that if you look at the comments that were made by the mayor of Tijuana, if you look at the Mexican interior minister saying that the government plans to reinforce the police presence in Tijuana and nearby Mexicali, and that 500 migrants that had tried to cross the border illegally, they were identified and will be deported immediately from Mexico, and also an administration working with the incoming president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, trying to figure out a way to keep the migrants seeking asylum, have them wait in Mexico. There's some legal issues, but have them wait in Mexico while their claims are adjudicated. So we have a relationship with Mexico that seems to be working in a number of different ways.
So I just want to point out that that number of 500 or so is roughly the elected leadership on the Hill. And so the criticism from me has been, well, why not Congress? Why haven't we been able to, with our elected officials, get something done? You heard Adrian calling for a bipartisan answer. I think at this point we just need an answer. And so if you've got a visual of what all of you gathered together would look like on the border, that's a pretty strong message that it's time to immediately do something.
Well, I agree with President Trump that we need to act. We've tried, by the way, multiple times to pass different bills to address our border security and interior security problems and the DACA problem. We've had 2 different variations, by the way. So if you didn't like one version, you had another.
One involved
over
a shutdown,
221 Republicans voted for that. Not one Democrat voted for either solution. And so they want a political answer. And look, President Obama used tear gas. So, I mean, there have been attempts to secure the border by both presidents, by all presidents. Not enough has been done. President Trump has said, let's actually go all the way to secure the border, both interior and including building the wall.
The one point I would make on that, Congressman, is that President Trump has had a full Republican House and Senate, and of course he controls the White House for the last 2 years, and nothing has happened. So,
and a 60-vote requirement in the Senate, which I don't agree with on many of these issues, but that's the rule over there, and not one Democrat has been willing to play ball. And so that's where you've been.
But they
not
tried.
One Democrat. By the way,
they tried.
When Pelosi was Speaker last time and you had super majorities in the House and Senate and President Obama, not one time did they try to bring a bill to solve this problem.
Yeah, why is that? That's an excellent point. I mean, because in that shutdown I was talking about, Democrat Chuck Schumer, leader of your people, your political people, Senator Schumer saying that, you know, he was willing on the DACA issue to shut down the government. Are Republicans willing to do that?
What we've been saying is let's fight to get proper funding to build the wall. And there are negotiations going on right now over the end of year funding. In just a few weeks, this all comes to an end. So the Homeland Security Department's budget expires at the end of November. One of the big negotiations we're in the middle of right now is over whether or not we can get more money to build the wall. I support that. We ought to do it.
Do you think it'll get done? Real quick. Will it happen?
It ought to get done. I support it. You know, and look, you've had no cooperation by Democrats in the House or Senate to want to solve this problem in a fair way when all kinds of bills have come to the floor. And they voted no on every one of the bills that have come to the floor.
Fascinating. I love your question, by the way. borrow it, but I will say it.
You can use it.
The list of potential Democrat contenders for 2020 is getting longer. The possible contenders and whether a crowded field will help or hurt. And add this to the list of new investigations of the Trump administration. When Democrats take over the House in January, a top Democrats vow to haul in the acting attorney general. Is that necessary?
California Democrat now vowing to bring acting attorney general Matthew Whitaker before Congress.
We are going to bring Whitaker before the Congress, assuming he's still in his position at the time when Democrats take over. We may bring him in whether he's in that position or not to find out the answers to these questions. One of the key decisions that the Attorney General will make, whoever's in that role, is when Bob Mueller puts together a report on, among other things, obstruction of justice, will that report be shared with the American people? Will it be shared with Congress? The American people need to know, they deserve to know, whether their president is interfering with a Bush administration justice.
But former Bush Attorney General Michael Casey says Whitaker's job is for the DOJ not to communicate with lawmakers. Whitaker has reportedly told associates that he won't get Mueller's budget, and Mueller told the court last week that Whitaker's appointment has posed no effect on his ongoing investigation. Congressman, I wonder if this is the interim appointment that has been twisted and not and making threats, and he is all the setup by the Trump administration. What do you think?
Well, they're trying to make claims about something that's not happening. If you look at what Whitaker's been doing, he's let Mueller continue his investigation. Frankly, a lot of us feel that it's time for Mueller to either come forward if there was any findings, which we found nothing. There's been no collusion that we found. And so if he has something, go and show it to the American people. If he doesn't, it's time to wrap this thing up. But at some point, you wonder, how far is this going to go? Is this a witch hunt, or is he actually trying to reach a conclusion based on what his initial intent was? And that was to see if there was any collusion. We've seen none. If he's seen some, it's time to show it.
But on that point, I mean, critics would say you're on Team Trump. So you didn't see any. That's not a surprise. How do you respond to that?
Well, Republicans and Democrats were part of that investigation. They've not come forward with any information of collusion. And by the way, you've seen leaks all throughout justice regarding this investigation. And so if there was anything that was, something that was really damaging, you've already seen it leaked out. And so if they've got something, show it to the American people. What's wrong with transparency? But if you don't have anything and you're just going to continue going on some kind of witch hunt, people are saying, okay, wrap this thing up, show us what you have if you have something. But there has been no interference, and Whitaker's not trying to interfere.
Along those lines, President Trump tweeting, when Mueller does his final report, will he be covering all of his conflicts of interest in the preamble? Will he be recommending action on all of the crimes of many kinds from those on the other side? Whatever happened to Podesta? And will he be putting in statements from hundreds of people closely involved with my campaign who never met, saw, or spoke to a Russian during this period? So many campaign workers, people inside from the beginning, asking me why they have not been called. They want to be. There was no collusion, and Mueller knows it. Harris, Professor Dershowitz saying something different, though.
Yeah, a legal scholar and guru saying that politically the president may be, sorely surprised with, and I'm paraphrasing him, with the amount, the volume, if you will, of detail in this report and politically damaging potential. He didn't say, though, directly that there would be any sort of criminal involvement or indication here, which is kind of the point, isn't it? I mean, the president can handle his politics the way he wants to, but if there's criminality, that would be different. And no one has said that. And you're talking about leaks, Congressman. I mean, it leaks like a sieve, everything on the Hill. So I don't know how the DOJ or other agencies may treat those leaks, but it's a problem. And so we might know something, we might not. Adrian, I know you have a different thought on it.
No, look, I mean, what Adam Schiff is doing here is he is simply exercising what is about to be his authority of oversight as the incoming head of the Intelligence Committee for Congress, for the entire Congress. Look, Whitaker has made a lot of comments that are biased, especially toward the Mueller investigation. And it is Congress's constitutional authority to make sure that there's a check and balance, and to make sure that if Whitaker, even as acting AG, is looking at the Constitution as what he is upholding as opposed to President Trump.
A quick pushback. You know, the president has called them the 13 angry Democrats on the team of Bob Mueller. And there is no shortage of information on how maybe some of them donated or voted or whatever. We could guess how they vote. We know how they donate. But there were a number of people who were on Mueller's team who are politically ilked in one direction. So if you want to call politics, we could start there.
Look, certainly people are entitled to have their own political opinions. Those opinions should not impede an investigation.
With the team being that heavily in one direction?
Well, first of all, the two members of his team that you're referring to, Strzok and Page, were removed when those text messages came forward. He took them off the investigation.
I'm talking about all the other Democrats. Because I'll tell you what, if it's found that there's no collusion or any criminality, wouldn't it help the case that all these Democrats found it?
Look, Bob Mueller was confirmed unanimously by the Senate twice, maybe 3 times.
Okay.
He is a past Republican. He is conducting a very above the board investigation. And I think to try to insinuate that people can't have their own personal political opinions.
But that's what they're saying about Whitaker
I agree
as
with
well.
that.
Really quickly, President Trump can take this one trumpet away from Congressman Schiff by nominating his next attorney general. He added to the majority in the Senate. Get it done and get Whitaker out.
All right, it's down to the wire now as Congress is facing a high-stakes deadline to pass a spending bill to avoid a pre-trial government shutdown. President Trump demanding border wall funding to get his signature.
Next month, President Trump has threatened to go ahead with a shutdown if lawmakers will not provide adequate funding for a border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. But Democratic Congressman Jim Himes says if there's a shutdown, it won't be the Democrats' fault.
It really is in the president's hands. It's going to be a real political problem for him. It won't be the Democrats in the House of Representatives that are shutting down the government. It'll be the president.
Well, the president has fewer than 40 days left to work with a Republican-controlled Congress. That gives him incentive to push hard for border wall funding, and it gives Democrats incentive not to play ball or to demand something big in return. Republican Senator Joni Ernst says lawmakers are working to avoid a shutdown.
I would rather that he didn't. Again, we as Congress need to work really hard, one, to make sure that we are funding our government. That is our job as Congress, is to fund the government. But we also understand that our constituents have stated quite clearly that they want to see our border protected. The president has been quite clear for a number of years. We need to do our best as well in Congress to make sure that we are protecting our nation and following up on the president's promises.
Congressman, how does it play out? We touched on it earlier, but what happens with the border wall funding? Does the president shut the government down? Or what happens?
Democrats have been fighting border security for a long time. But think about this, first of all. We funded over 70% of the United States government. So when we're talking about a shutdown, it's a theoretical term. The military is funded. That's an incredibly important piece to note. Our troops are going to get paid. In fact, President Trump just signed into law a pay raise for our troops. First time in 9 years that the Department of Defense has been funded for a full fiscal year. So that was a really important accomplishment. So now we're really talking about the Department of Homeland Security's budget, a very important agency. And the real issue at stake right now is whether or not we're going to fund border security, including the wall. I say we do it. Democrats have been fighting it. But when you see what's going on, when you see people literally trying to attack law enforcement officers illegally, when there's a legal way to come into our country, they choose to try to attack law enforcement officers. It shows you why it's important to protect our border. This is an important fight.
I can tell you why, Melissa, the president will not let the government shut down is because the stock market could tank. And it has been tanking, and all 3 major market gauges are underwater year to date. We know that he is focused on that, and that would certainly be bad for what he sees as one of his most important popularity or polling indicators.
Yeah, he is very much focused on the stock market. I mean, I would ask the congressman, do you think you're more likely to get a deal with Nancy Pelosi in place? I mean, she is great at whipping votes. She has a rare opportunity here, if she is the speaker, to have a seat at the table and claim victory if anything gets done. The president wanted to make a deal last time around. It seemed like they were talking about one at the White House, and then Schumer and Pelosi left. All of a sudden, everything fell apart. What's your sense on, would Nancy Pelosi help get a deal done if she could get some credit for it with the president?
Well, the opportunity is there, and you saw back over a year ago, the president and Chuck Schumer had an agreement.
What happened?
It might have lasted maybe 12 hours, and the left went nuts. The radical left said, we don't want anybody reaching any kind of agreement with the president on immigration. Again, gets back to the point when President Obama was in office with a supermajority in the House and Senate. They didn't want to get a deal done then. A deal is there to be had. It's got to include securing the border. The problem with the last big immigration bill was 1986. They promised border security and had amnesty. They got the amnesty. They never followed through on the border security.
Is your side willing to give? Is your side willing to give on the amnesty or DACA?
The president it wasn't about amnesty. It was about resolving DACA. And the president had an agreement with Chuck Schumer on how to do that. And then Chuck Schumer walked away. If they want to come back to the table,
same deal?
There's an ability to get something done. I'm sure something very similar to that would be a possibility. But again, they've got to be willing to come to the table, and securing the border and funding the wall has to be a big piece of that.
Adrienne was shaking her head.
Well, I
don't know if you knew they were doing that. But.
I want to gently push back on something that you said, because Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi both made it very clear that they would compromise some way on border security if there was a path to citizenship for Dreamers. President Trump is the one. We saw it all on national television. They were sitting in the White House. It was nationally televised, having this conversation, and the president changed his mind and went back on what he would be willing to compromise on. So, look, I do think
he only changed his mind after Chuck Schumer walked away from the wall funding. So both of those issues were in the
because Democrats are not going to allow a full wall to be built, but we do want stronger border security funding.
Then what you're saying is they don't want any kind of deal.
No,
resolving
we don't want a
without
wall.
amnesty, going to a merit-based system is something we had two different votes on in the House. Every Democrat voted no. So there's a way to solve DACA, and the president's even been willing to put that on the table, but it's got to be an agreement.
For a full wall. Not for a full wall.
He gets the final word.
So just real quickly, no one wants to build a full wall because you can't. There are areas along the border that would not suffice. You can't build along there. The president has said that you would shore those areas up with additional
It's a wall
control.
Plus technology and border
So
system.
I don't know where the entire wall comes from, Adrienne.
I think there's a lot.
But again, 2006 is when it was funded. Democrats in power at that time. Moving on. Now to the showdown between House Republicans and former FBI Director James Comey. Comey has vowed to fight a subpoena to testify behind closed doors next week. Now he's saying he'd prefer to testify in public to avoid what he calls selective leaks. But House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy has offered a solution. Watch it.
The remedy for leaks is not to have a public hearing where you are supposed to ask about 17 months worth of work in 5 minutes. I think the remedy is to videotape the deposition, videotape the transcribed interview. That way the public can see whether the question was fair. They can judge the entirety of the answer. But there is no fact finder on the planet that tries to discover the truth in 5-minute increments. And I can't think of one that does it on national television.
Why not? I mean, one of the most egregious moments that we've seen was a former employee of the president's walk into the Situation Room for her book and turn on her phone. Why not record this?
Well, I think what Chairman Gowdy and Chairman Goodlatte have been talking about makes a lot of sense. By the way, if anybody knows anything about leaks, it's James Comey. So for him to be worried about leaks, it's really ironic. So you got to point that out. But anyway, I think this idea is a really good one because 5-minute increments we saw during the Kavanaugh hearing. You're just starting to get kind of a back and forth to get to a solution. How are you going to answer a question that's been asked, that needs to be answered? In 5 minutes, it's hard to do that on an issue this important. Go to a closed hearing, but have it all videotaped where you can have a longer interaction. You can actually get to the questions being answered. That's what Chairman Gowdy's offered. I think it makes a lot of sense.
So, Dagan, do you think that stops people from being as honest because they know that they're on, that they're being recorded?
What would stop you from being dishonest or would make you honest is knowing that you could have charges filed against you potentially if you're inconsistent and you lie in front of Congress. And I think that there's been a problem of equal application of the law under, quite frankly, Jeff Sessions running the Department of Justice, that there were times when I know that there were subpoenas served to Brian Pagliano, who was the tech guy for Hillary Clinton, and he didn't show up for the subpoenas. And Jason Chaffetz went to Jeff Sessions and said, you need to file charges against this guy for not honoring the subpoena. Jeff Sessions wouldn't do it. He wouldn't touch it because it was a, quote, Hillary Clinton issue. And we know that based on Chaffetz's book. But I think that James Comey's lawyer has said we're going to fight anything that's behind closed doors. Unclear if he would concede to a videotape. But, you know, it's harder on videotape for Jim Comey to hump his book as a great gift for the holidays. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the point. He loves the spotlight, and that's why he potentially wants to be in, you know, in open hearing.
Right. When you could segue too into classified versus unclassified information, but I would imagine that you also could just stop the tape, right?
Yeah, you can go to a classified setting if there's classified information being discussed, and then the rest of it could be out in the public domain. There's a way to do this if James Comey wants to come forward and be willing to talk about what really happened.
To me, it seems like the real difference between all these things is it for political purposes when you want to sit out front? And James Comey, I mean, he's chatty Cathy, loves to be on camera, call into the radio shows, whatever he can do. So I'm not surprised that he wants to be on camera once again.
Well, but when it comes time to be under oath and actually answering real questions by people asking him who have information that ultimately deserves to be answered, and the American people want to see these questions answered.
I guess I would ask you, because congressmen and senators all grandstand in front of the camera as well, when it's behind closed doors, because we don't know, we're not there. Is it very different? What's it like?
Well, you can get into a lot more detailed answer. You know, the soundbite setup or even the 5-minute setup. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. Yeah. We've questioned vice presidents and cabinet secretaries. 5 minutes goes by incredibly quick. If you want to have a longer discussion, both options, by the way, have now been offered to James Comey. If he doesn't want to go into either setting, it makes you wonder, what is he trying to hide?
He's trying to run the clock
Real
out
quickly,
until
I
the
want to get
Democrats
Adrienne into
take
the
over.
conversation. Just a quick last word.
Yeah, I don't really have a strong opinion on this. I mean, I think transparency is always important in these settings. But, you know, is James Comey going to peddle his book? Is taken suggested by having some sort of open here? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I can see both options making sense.
Of law enforcement.
Oh my goodness.
He's ready for his close-up. Where do you want me? Oh, you want me in the middle of 6th Avenue? You got a camera? I'm talking, unless it's to the Republicans, about what really matters.
But I think transparency is important here, and I think the American people, whether it's on videotape or whether it's in a public hearing, deserve to see what question is he being asked and what he says.
Agreed.
It is a big week for House Democrats as they will vote for leadership in the new Congress, and some are softening their opposition to Nancy Pelosi, reclaiming the Speaker's gavel. I'm reclaiming my time. But could a call for younger leaders
have opposed her? But Connecticut Congressman Jim Himes says it's hard to argue with the results under her leadership.
When the top 3 people in the House of Representatives are in their late 70s, it would be good for us to have a more diverse group generationally. But let me tell you this. I mean, the attack on Nancy Pelosi was, prior to the election, that she's such a drag on the electoral prospects of Democrats. You can't win with Nancy Pelosi. Holy smokes, did that criticism turn out to be wrong?
Meanwhile, a growing number of Democrats who said they would vote against Pelosi are dropping their opposition. That includes New York's Brian Higgins and Massachusetts' Stephen Lynch. Incoming New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lashing out at Democratic moderates in the, quote, Problem Solvers Caucus. They say they'll oppose Pelosi unless she supports rules intended to reduce partisan gridlock. Ocasio-Cortez tweeting 9 Dems are choosing to hold the entire 220-plus caucus hostage if we don't accept their GOP-friendly rules that will hamstring health care efforts from the get-go. People sent us here to get things done, not negotiate with an administration that jails children and guts people's health care. What do you say to that, Congressman?
And they say Republican infighting happens in Congress. It is interesting to watch this play out. Look, there's going to be about 234 House Democrats. I think there's one race that still hasn't been decided. But ultimately, that means Nancy Pelosi would have about an 18-vote margin. I think she gets the votes. 9 people can't hold the conference hostage because it would take 18 to block anything in that kind of Democrat majority. So I think in the end, she will be elected Speaker. And look, I mean, she's well known in a lot of parts of the country, but there were a lot of these members that won their seats saying they would not vote for Nancy Pelosi. I think everybody's going to be watching in January when that first actual vote happens and somebody has to stand up and announce a name. And if you campaign saying, I'm not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, now are you going to actually follow through on that promise, or is your first vote going to be a lot of the people that elected you?
What's better for the party, to have her there or not? I mean, does it stifle the bench when she's out front and, you know, there isn't that next group coming in?
I think it's important to have her there because, number one, you have a lot of new members, and Nancy